Thank you for joining us this morning, and we're going to have a little talk to you for a while. So we've been invited here by Zeb to talk. We're going to kick off this morning. My name is Daniel Jones, and this is Josie Bythell.
Kia ora.
We've come here from different organisations, I guess, to tell you a little bit about our stories, what brought us here, how we're friends with Zeb, and how we fit into the local region. We're also kind of like friends and crossover. You could draw a nice Venn diagram of us working together somewhere, but we're not here to draw that today. So, as I said, my name's Daniel. I've known Zeb since I got to Southland, which was maybe about 5 years ago. I've lived throughout New Zealand over the last 15 years. And I moved down to a small town just west of here called Lumsden, as I say, about 5 years ago. And my partner, Josie, and Josie was supposed to be here with me today, but she's feeling a little bit ill, unfortunately. We started, when we came down, we started asking people, one of the big things for us was like, where can we go and where can we get outdoors and start walking around? It's a beautiful region, and I don't know, some of you are from the local region or come from elsewhere, but big open pastures, but not a lot of places, or there's a lot of places you can go, but you usually have to ask people, where can I go? Where can I walk? People started directing us around, and we started learning about the history of this area. So we started walking up into the Air Hills and being introduced to beautiful little pockets of old forest. And this idea started to be born in us, like, if this was what Southland was like, why is it like it is today, And it led us down this pathway and this road of learning all about the local region. So Jessie's going to probably jump in and tell me how wrong my understanding of the story is here, because she's the expert on it. But I'll tell you a little bit from what I understand about how this region has changed over time, hey? So, we're going back maybe 20,000 years ago. We had the last great ice age, and the mountains were covered. We had lots of glaciers, and as they started to retreat, the open lowlands here of Southland and Otago, which is the region I'll talk about today, started to get filled in with the forest land. So Southland here, in the preceding probably gap until about, I'm going to kind of cover a gap until about 1,000 years ago, because this is roughly when people started to get involved in New Zealand. But Southland as a region was completely blanketed in forest, basically. There was a combination of what you now call podocarp forest, which is the old giants, the matais, the remus, the kahikatea. And then up in the mountains, you had the alpine beech, and they were kind of met together and blended. And there was tussock and grasses and ferns and all sorts of beautiful things growing everywhere. Here in our part of Southland, we're kind of nestled between a few different areas. We've got the beautiful wet rainforest that comes from Fiordland, and we've got the drier schist mountainous area to the north of us, that's Otago. But down here in the lower kind of Southland, that was my understanding, right? At one time it was almost as thick under forest as you now can only really see if you venture west and go over into the Fiordland National Park. So people started travelling into the area. The Maori arrived and they started venturing in and exploring the land. They were looking for punamu, and they were hunting and gathering and exploring. And what they did when they were here and they were travelling is fires were set, basically. There's no other way to put it. Huge swathes of forest land were burnt down. So, but if you look between about 1,000 years ago and maybe 1840 is the next stamp that I'm going to put in, we can probably understand why I mentioned that kind of area. But New Zealand as a whole had by that time lost about 1/3 of its natural forest land. Europeans arrived, or explorers, and between 1840 and today, we've roughly lost about another 1/3 of the natural forest land that was once covered almost the entire country. What was being left here in Southland is that a huge, I haven't even got numbers on this, but a huge swathe of the forest that we once had here. And even this area now would have been dense, thick forest under giant trees, is now open pasture farmland. You know, I think most of us realize what, you know, how it's all changed over time and what the land use is here today. So we started looking around for those pockets of lands, my partner Josie and I, and we venture out into these beautiful forests. And Josie's got a bit of an obsession with growing plants, and I just help her do it. Just a little bit of an obsession. And we, you know, what we started doing is we would travel and we would get, you know, old bread bags that we'd saved under the sink, and we'd go and stuff a load of them into a backpack, and we'd go walking, and then we'd go and gather stuff from under the trees of all this like litter, and we'd take them home, and we'd get little seed trays. We put a little bit of, you know, some newspaper and some dirt, and then put the litter on, and then we'd just water it, you know, once a week or so, and leave it in a tunnel house, and we'd just wait and see what grows. And what you get from these little things is we would have them all, like, because she's like, she writes everything, you know, she'll have her little tags where we collected it and making notes, and you'd have almost like these little mini forests grow out, and they would be quite unique, and they would be based on, like, we'd have our little beech forest grow, and then in all these trays we'd have like matai and kahikatea come up, and so then we took these little plants and we grow them a bit higher, and then we pot them up again. And today, I mean, you can see some of the plants we got around us have been grown by the projects that eventually came from our little obsession. So this kind of, it grew and it grew, not to, you know, lose a pun. And it kind of started taking up all of this space, and we started exploring Southland even more, and we met people like Zeb, and with shared interests, and we met Jessie, and like all of this web of contacts started to grow, at the same time as like we did a count, and it's like, oh my God, we've got like 10,000 plants in our garden now, do you know what I mean? So we're trying to give away plants, and we're like, oh, what can we do with them all? So we got talking to the local council over in Lumsden, because there was very little of anything there. And we started asking, can we plant some waterways here? We'd like to do a little bit of restoration work in the local town, you know, give something back to the community. Long story short, we like applied for funding. We set up a not-for-profit. We called ourselves the Northern Southland Reforestation Trust. And we got some funding. We found some area in town. We put a little nursery in place, and we started off with nothing but seed collecting and donating, getting rid of the plants just so Josie could grow more plants at home. Do you know what I mean? It was a bit of a clear out. So we moved like a load of plants down. We started planting up the creek, and we got all these people on board to help. A little community group sort of grew around us of people who were interested in doing something, you know, following us along in this little journey we found ourselves on, basically. And then, yeah, so the nursery grew out of nothing, and now we've probably been in that space for about 18 months. So in the first year, our primary goal was to get the nursery up and running. We had a little bit of funding come through from MPI and a few other places and some local community groups, but it was a blank canvas. And so we put some tunnel houses in, we started, you know, putting some seeds in trays, and all of that grew. And we're at a point now where we've got probably about 20,000 native plants growing at the nursery. All of the plants on the sides here are just a small selection of what we grow for revegetation projects, basically. So we're in a position now where we've got a couple of people employed from the local community. We've got a nursery manager who works down there about 20 hours a week. We've got an operations manager who's great and helps us apply for funding and work out how to make it a self-fulfilling organisation. The idea from the start was that we would always sell maybe about 30–40% of the plants we produce to, you know, people who wanted natives in their gardens, to local landowners and farmers who wanted to do replanting projects. And then the rest of the plants would be donated to community projects, to anyone who wanted to put native trees in the ground. And I guess that's where we are today, really. We've got a lot of great projects on the go at the moment. So we're continuing with the planting of the native, with the Lumsden stream, which is basically, it's a stream that runs from the hills in the west here and goes down through town and feeds into the Areti River. The Areti is the river, one of the big four rivers that runs. The Matara is behind us. The next one along is the Areti. And that comes down from the Ayr Mountains, which sits south of Queenstown, and kind of flows right down almost next to that road that goes all the way south to Invercargill, hey, and comes out of an estuary there by the south. So that river was once a big meandering river with lots of, floodplains, and it's slowly over the last 100 years or so been squashed in, and there's big flood banks, and it's very fast flowing and not very meandering now as a river. We're starting to do replanting on all the streams the big idea is we want to replant all of the streams in and around Lumsden that flow into that river. Because the way that the local councils have tackled it over the last 40 years is just to use glyphosate, so they don't have to do any weeding. They just go along those streams, they spray everything out. And when we arrived in Lumsden, they were just basically dead banks, like going into a stream that was like filling up with algae every year, basically, wasn't it? So there's, we didn't make all of this stuff up. We've learned a lot on our journey. We've learned about restoration and how to kickstart a local natural ecosystem. So we go and put some plants in, and the first few years you have to kind of look after it quite a lot. You go back, do a bit of weeding, you pull some stuff out, you plant some other stuff, but eventually it grows to a point, hopefully, where it's in the next year or two, the streams that we've planted will need no one else to go and look after it. It'll just look after itself. So there's a whole science behind there, as I say. For those of you who don't know it, I'll talk on it very quickly. But and this goes for anyone who's interested in replanting any waterway. So you have like the 3 different sections. You have close to the water, which back in the day or ancient would have been covered with grasses. So we use plants. I'm not even sure we've got any here. We don't, but they're like carex. Very fast growing. They grow up and they kind of cover each other and they shade the water. So that stops any algae growth, and it gives that real protected area for any native fishes and invertebrates to thrive and come back and live. And then in the next section, you plant kind of tussocks and other small bushes and grasses. And then in the top section, you go for the bigger stuff, the cabbage trees, the coprosmas, and everything else. As I say, I'm no expert on this. Josie could talk about it all day long. Josie was unfortunately sick today, so couldn't join us. Yeah. So yeah, this is a little bit about ourselves. Before I pass over to what we want to do is, Jessie's going to have a chance to talk to you about what her line of work is and the stuff she's interested in. And then the other thing I'll just mention is that these plants have been brought for you guys. So please, on your way home today, feel free to grab a plant for yourself, take it home, put it in the garden, or just get it in the ground, because that's what our trust is all about, really.
Cool.
And then after Jessie's song, we wanted to throw it out for a bit of a Q&A, really, because we wanted to see if we can generate some discussion around this, and we've got the expert here, and I'll jump in if and when I can, but we've got an expert here. We can pick her brain and ask her anything you guys might be interested in learning about.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now Jessie's going to correct everything I said that was wrong.
No, not at all, mate. No, it was bang on. So kia ora, my name's Josie Bythell. I've sort of got a few hats that I wear, but I am branded up today with the QE2 National Trust, so I do work for those guys, and I can explain if anyone's interested in what that is and how it works. I'm happy to talk you through that, but it's quite technical and nerdy, so I thought I'd talk more about plants, and then if people wanted to circle back and ask me about that, I'll be here till lunchtime at least, so you can hit me up and query me, what is this all about, what's Ngā Kairohu Papa or the QE2 National Trust, how does that work? But yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Jessie's sort of wisdom. I've got some grey hairs, but I still don't count myself as wise and old and experienced, but as Dan said, we know a little bit, and we've learned a lot from others who've gone before us. You know, we stand on the shoulder of giants, as the saying goes, so we've managed to capture knowledge and learn knowledge from others who've got decades and decades of experience doing this work in Southland, and figure out, you know, how to do things so that they're going to succeed and be healthy and thrive. So I thought I'd just sort of distill 3 principles of restoration that you guys might be interested in and thinking about and maybe applying in your own projects. And then, yeah, we can talk a little bit about those, and then, as Dan said, we'll go back to sort of open question, or maybe it will just evolve into a discussion in a more natural and free-flowing way. So yeah, 3 principles of restoration. I'm just going to check my notes to make sure I get it right. It'd be really embarrassing, right, if I got principle 3 at the start or buggered it up.
Number 1, spray out the weeds.
Number 1, look at your notes. So yeah, so essentially what we talk about when we talk about restoration, it's basically a healing activity, right? We are restoring something. We're trying to make it healthy again so it can persist and be resilient and self-sustaining. So, you know, like doctors, like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. Try and understand how the system works and what it is, what the values are that are there, so that you don't accidentally, through no ill intentions, no malicious intent, but just by mistakes or not having enough knowledge, that you don't accidentally harm it in your attempts to restore it or fix it up. So first do no harm would be my first piece of wisdom, and I'll drill into that in a little bit more. The second principle is try to be efficient. I know efficient is like a sort of economist term that we hear all the time. It sounds very dry and inhuman, but we're all time poor. We're all limited in their ability to do things while we've got this time on this planet. We have so many projects we're passionate about. We get drawn into them. We feel like we can't be everywhere at once, and we get so enthusiastic, and sometimes you start beating yourself up because you can't be everywhere at once and you can't do all the things. So trying to be efficient in your output and in the way you do things, both in your own time and your own sort of emotional energy and the way you pace yourself, but also how you actually execute a project, how you stretch your resource as far as you can. There's 2 ways to see that. 1, you can have much better outcomes. 2, you can be greedy and try and do more with the small amount of resource that you can stretch. So yeah, efficiency is really, really key, and I'll drill into that as well. And then the last one is enjoy yourself. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes we forget. We get so burrowed deep down into the project that we're involved in, and end of year reporting and balancing budgets and all that really dry, boring stuff that you kind of get sucked into doing when you get funding and you get involved and the project gets bigger, and it's not just mucking about in your garden with your own little plants and suddenly you've escalated it into a full-blown social enterprise and you're doing amazing stuff. Whoa, that escalated quickly, you know, and then, you know, you can get sort of tunnel vision because you've got to focus on that really practical, necessary, but sometimes dry and not very exciting budgets and operational planning. And, you know, just remember to stop and pause and see what you've done and celebrate it and share that and enjoy and be joyful about it, because, yeah, it's good stuff. It's good mahi, and it's great to stand back and take stock and reflect on what you've achieved. Take endless photos, just take so many photos, because you'll blink and it will change and you'll be amazed how much progress you've made, even just in 1 year. So, so yeah, first do no harm, be efficient, and enjoy yourself while you're at it. So right, back to first do no harm. So I'm not here to tell you the paint by numbers, quick download of exactly how to restore every ecosystem in New Zealand. That would be a lifetime's worth of study. We have such diversity in this country. We have so many diverse ecosystems just in Southland alone. We've got something like 27 different kinds of wetland in Southland. So we use this word wetland as if it's just sort of one big homogenous thing, but they're ultra diverse. We have coastal wetlands, we have alpine wetlands, we have river systems, we have peat bogs, we have so many things. So it would be pretty impractical for me to stand here and like step you through all the steps for every ecosystem in every context in every part of Southland, let alone New Zealand. So again, we fall back on people who've had their lifetime or have had the leisure to really burrow into that knowledge and get that really familiar knowledge with the local site. So when you've got a project in mind, maybe it's on your own farm, maybe it's at a local reserve or a piece of shared land or something that you want to get involved with, do your homework, find out what was there, find out what's still there, talk to people who might be able to help you. So that's DOC, that's universities, that's regional council, that's your local botanical society, your local ornithological society. Any nature nerds that you can just corner, like honestly, they will be stoked, they will love it, they will just, you'll have trouble shutting them up actually, so watch out, you know, you're going to unleash, you're going to open the floodgates. So find your local experts and get them to help walk you through and talk you through what was there. So you might be lucky enough that your project site has clues already on the landscape. You've got a little remnant of forest or shrubland, or you've it's some wetland left. That's wonderful. That really helps you zero in on what that system is trying to do and what it's capable of doing. In some cases it's totally changed and you're on a system that's entirely novel. So here we're standing in a paddock, not to bum you all out, but the truth is 800,000 years ago this would have been Matai Totara forest, heaving with birds and covered in trees that were hundreds and hundreds of years old. And this is the story of New Zealand. We have changed our landscape so dramatically because it's quite hard to produce fibre and protein in a forest. You know, we've returned to these grazing landscapes and we've changed our landscape. So sometimes we have a project site in mind. It might be the school grounds, or it might be a farm, or it might be marae grounds or something, and everything's just completely changed. It's just a grassy paddock essentially, or a very simple system filled with plants that don't occur naturally here. So anyway, those ones are a little harder and you've got to do more sleuthing, but there are great ways to figure out what grew in those areas or what might be suitable and good idea to put back into those areas. So yeah, and I'm happy to direct people to some resources on good ways to sort of dig that knowledge out, but it is out there and it's kind of fun. It's like a puzzle that you're trying to put together and you're trying to figure out where the pieces are and how it all slots together. So if you like detective novels and that sort of thing, and you like, you know, we're humans, we're pattern finders, right? So puzzles is, you know, that's my jam. So anyway, so yeah, find out what was there, find out what's capable of being there, and that can be really helpful because sometimes we accidentally, through our enthusiasm, through our rush to get stuck in, because we all love picking up a spade and doing something, and it's sitting there and reading old journals and things is a bit dry and a bit boring. Sometimes we accidentally harm things in our good intent to do good things. A classic example might be we grab some plants from Mitre 10 and we just stick them in the ground, and she'll be right, they're all natives, right? They all just grow all around New Zealand. But those might be cultivated varieties, or those might be plants that only occur naturally in some remote, narrow part of the North Island. They're not actually even native to your area. So you think you might be doing restoration, but you're really just sort of doing gardening, but you're not aware that there's a distinction, or you're doing a sort of a landscaping exercise, but you might think it's conservation. So those are things. Find out what should grow and source your plants from a reputable local nursery that understands the natural patterns of your area. And two, if you've got a system there that might be a little bit cryptic or hard to understand, you can get experts to help you interpret that. So a classic one I see in Southland is someone has a wet part of their farm. They're trying to do something good for nature. They might want to put in a wetland for wildlife, for birds. They might want a little bit of sediment trap so that they are not leaking sediment onto the neighbour's farm or into the bigger river system. And they'll go and dig a hole in a marsh or an ephemeral wetland, which are two rare ecosystem types, and accidentally destroy those whilst trying to build a wetland. So they've nuked a wetland in the process of trying to build a wetland. And that's not done maliciously, that's just done through lack of knowledge. So we sometimes screw up, and so I guess my sort of wisdom here is try not to screw up if you can help it. So first, do no harm. Tread carefully. Don't get the digger until you know what you're doing. Yeah, I think I have another example a bit like that might be interesting.
Touching briefly on the idea of eco-source in there as well.
Yep, that'll come into my efficiency thingy. And I guess this is more of a message for farming, but the old less is more, you know, saw that old phrase, less is more. It sounds a bit contradictory, but sometimes we have ecosystems on our farms, on our landscapes, that they're holding their own, they're hanging in there. We can graze them a little bit, might be a tussock grassland that sheep move through. Yes, it's modified, yes, they're taking some of the more palatable things out of that system, but it's still holding its own, and leaving that status quo and not developing that last 5% of your farm and not putting the plough through it or not burning that tussock off, that's a really easy way to hold that gain. So again, first do no harm. You might still have something left. We don't need to keep intensifying and putting more pressure and demanding more of our land. Most of the time those bits that are left are the least productive bits for farmland anyway. Generations of people have tried to whip them into shape and failed every time. So, you know, that's the wrong end of the bell curve. Just stop flogging that dead horse, you know, just quit while you're ahead. So that would be part of that first do no harm. And sadly, we're still losing biodiversity in New Zealand. We still have tens of thousands of hectares of native vegetation disappear every year. So it's not big obvious stuff. It's not like logging rainforests and great big swatches. It's just little bits here and there. A new subdivision goes in and a wetland gets covered over in concrete, or somebody plants some pine trees into a red tussock grassland and they shade that out and you lose the grassland. Or you know, a farmer might put another drain in a wetland and it just slowly dries out. So just bit by bit, step by step, nail by nail, we are slowly still doing harm. So yeah, sad as it sounds, but we can do better. And the reason me and Dan are bumming you out with all this, oh, it used to be amazing, is not because we want everyone to feel guilty and wear hair shirts and wander around with their, with crying and sad, but because the bits that we've still got left are that much more precious, because there's only just a little bit of them now. So Dan talked about 1/3 and 1/3 approximately for Polynesian or Māori clearance and then European clearance. When Māori cleared the land, they used fire as their primary tool. What grew back was native stuff. So it was a different model. Yes, we lost forests and it changed to shrublands, it changed to tussock grasslands, but they were still native systems. And then the system could just kind of regenerate back at a different speed, and there were birds missing and things had changed, but it was still a less of an intensive form of change. Europeans brought chainsaws, diggers, herbicide, big grazing cattle, all sorts of other tools, and everything just accelerated really, really rapidly. So a lot of wetland loss occurred really post European arrival, because they had this ability to really change the landscape. Anyway, so back to the efficiency thing. So one way you can be efficient is exactly what Dan was describing before. So this concept of eco-sourcing, it's sort of an old term that's been around for a while. Probably a few of you have heard it. Hands up, anyone who's heard that term? Awesome. So just for those who haven't, it essentially is talking about using things that are local to your area and using things that are appropriate for your area. So if you're restoring a wetland, find out what kind of wetland you're working with, find out what the reference ecosystem might be. If you're lucky you've got one on your land already, or there's one nearby, you can go have a look at it, find out what plants are what lives in that system and put them back into the ecosystem. And best practice is to use wild source plants. So most nurseries will be able to tell you where they get their plants from, good nurseries. Some are just retail nurseries, so they don't actually grow their plants, they source them from a wholesaler, and things like garden centres and Mitre 10 and that sort of thing tend to do that. They wouldn't be able to, the sales assistant at Mitre 10 cannot tell you where that cabbage tree came from.
Yeah.
They might even not be able to tell you what species it is, because they'll just say cabbage tree. It could be anything.
Or you can get dragged around by your obsessive partner having to pick seeds off plants,
Yeah, like we said, careful what you get involved in. And then speaking as a full-blown plant growing addict, just, I'm in a safe space here, so careful when you start growing plants. You really will get a little bit obsessed with it, and it might take over your whole garden and take over your whole life if you're not careful. But it's a joyful and very rewarding way to spend your time. So a good nursery, so local is best, because the genetics for your local area are proven, right? They're tough, they're resilient, they're the best fit for that space. And secondly, wild population, so naturally occurring populations. And they can be a little hard to pick sometimes, because we do plant stuff back into the landscape, and over time those planted areas do look natural. And then sometimes people will go collect from those, and maybe there was a bit of a mistake made when those plants were done and something wasn't actually local, or all the plants were sourced from one tree, so they're all pretty much identical to each other genetically, or something like that hasn't been best practice. So where at all possible, go to naturally occurring wild populations of plants. If you're lucky, if you've got your land of your own or access to land, or you have that reference ecosystem on your own land, then you can collect directly from there. So that's a really great, it's a really great resource that you can use, and you know you're getting it right, and it takes the guesswork out of it. In some cases, you'll still need to do supplementary stuff because the very palatable species or the very fire vulnerable species might have been removed from the landscape a long time ago, and they only persist in little refugia, little places where they've managed to survive. So sometimes you do have to cast the net a little wider. For example, in what would be the example here? So we're in the Gore Ecological District here, which has lost pretty much almost all of its indigenous cover, and some of the ecosystem types that used to be here are completely gone now. So if you wanted to reinstate, say, Kowhai ribbonwood, Kowhai manatū, lowland riparian forest, you wouldn't be able to source those plants here. You'd have to go a little bit further. You'd have to go just down the road into the Southland Plains and try and match that as best you can. Same with like the Wakatipu Basin. I've lost all the ribbonwood groves more or less up there, so they have to come to Southland to collect seed for that. So sometimes you do have to be, beggars can't be choosers, as the saying goes, so sometimes you have to go a little further afield. The other efficiency is do really pay attention to the site constraints. You can kill and lose and kill a lot of plants and lose a lot of money by planting things in the wrong spot. So you've got your wider site considerations where climate, slope, rainfall, all of that sort of stuff, soil type, but then within your site you'll have little micro sites. So like Dan explained, you'll have your zones against the stream, the higher, the lower and the intermediate zones. Some of those areas flood periodically, some are always dry. If you can find those little micro sites, then you will get really better survival and better success and better efficiency.
Time of year as well is another good factor.
What was that, sorry?
Time of year to plant.
Yes, that's right. So some areas, like up in Queenstown, they plant in spring because it's still moist, the soil moisture levels are high, we're past the frost zone. In Auckland they plant in the middle of winter when it's away from the summer droughts. In Southland we tend to do spring, although you can get away with autumn. So your local area will have the best sort of timing for that. Hang on a minute, I'll just check my notes again. I don't want to leave out any of the good stuff. So another way to be efficient, I guess I'm thinking more about a farm here because I do a lot of work on farms, but this sort of concept applies more broadly, is you do need to do a little bit of triage. So there will be some things, the low-hanging fruit, the quick and easy fixes that don't take very much resource but can have really, really big results. So a classic example would be some really aggressive weed that's just moved in, that's about to sort of crash your whole system and take over, like crack willow or sycamore or something like this. It just moves very fast. So the old stitch in time saves 9 adage, if you jump in and knock out that mother tree, that seeding tree, and knock out some of those seedlings, you will save yourselves a whole lot of work and heartache 5 years down the line when suddenly you're like, oh no, all of my planting areas are filled with sycamore. Dang, that wasn't my intention. So sometimes just kind of stepping back, taking a bit of an overview and just trying to find those really quick, low-hanging fruit type of things you can do is a great way to get efficiency. Otherwise, even though they're not always that sexy, they can be kind of boring, like killing a weed or putting up a fence. They'll save you a lot in the long run. So yeah, again, just about being efficient. I guess the other thing is, the big message is, sometimes we don't get a choice. The site we're working with, we just have to work with the constraints that are there. But back to what I said before about if you're lucky enough to have some remnant vegetation there, not only does it inform you of what to put back in the landscape, it also gives you something to springboard off. You've got the building blocks already there, and all you need to do is take the brakes off nature and just give nature the tools that it's already, like, stop holding nature back, essentially. So if it's something like a forest that's got livestock, domestic livestock camping in it and accessing and trampling through it, put a fence around it. If it's a wetland that's got a couple of drains that have been cut through it, and you can, without stuffing it up for your neighbours or flooding your house or anything, block a few drains strategically and re-wet that system. That is going to be so much more efficient than trying to continually plant more plants into that space in a dry wetland, in a dried out wetland. And there's been some really good studies on this, looking at the difference between restoration, where you're enhancing, you might do a bit of supplementary planting, or as I said, exclude livestock, or do a bit of strategic weed control, or re-wet a system. That sort of restoration, so you're enhancing what's there, versus sort of blank slate new projects from scratch where you're planting everything has to be brought back in. So none of the soil fungi are there, none of the invertebrate fauna are there. You've got to kind of do it all from scratch, kind of like God, trying to create the world from scratch. Now that's takes a lot of energy, right? And it's slow. So there's been studies that show that it's a 1 to 100 ratio. So that's an amazing efficiency gain. If you can just take the brakes off nature, for every dollar you spend doing that, to achieve the equivalent in a total blank slate new project, you'd have to spend $100 to achieve the same thing. And that's just with forest ecosystems. Some ecosystems, the price tag isn't even known. They're so sensitive, so complex to restore. We don't even have the science yet to do it. And so in that case, back to the start, principle 1, first do no harm. Just try not to stuff them up in the first place, because we're not even sure how to put those back together. We don't even have the science. And I think because I'm at a regen ag sort of space here, I might just make a little plug for drylands. So drylands, we don't have too many in Southland, but I've got a real soft spot in my heart for drylands. These are these sort of scrabby, scruffy, unloved, weird little ecosystems. The plants are all about this high. You have to be an ultra nerd to even know they're there, and get down on your hands and knees, like assume the position of worship, and get down and look at them and get your hand lens out and really get into it. Might need a couple of experts to help you along your way. These are amazing plants. They might only be 2 centimetres high. Sometimes their root systems go 7 metres deep, and they can live for decades, and they're just the most incredible, interesting and rare ecosystem. So they tend to be herbs, big crazy herbs, in a diverse range of families: the daisy family, the buttercup family, the borage family, you name it. There's some really weird and wacky stuff out there. And these systems have evolved under stress, under natural stresses, and they like to be stressed. They've specialised to live in spaces where nothing else can live, and they don't like competition. So when we supercharge the system, when we hydrate that system, when we fertilise that system, we might be lifting the productivity from a human perspective, from a farming perspective. We're increasing dry matter per hectare and fibre and protein. We're actually stuffing that little special thing, and so we're actually inadvertently sometimes creating a net biodiversity loss. And sometimes that's the only place that little system is left. It's just hanging on in 1 or 2 places. Our lowlands have the most threatened ecosystems in them. That's where we build our cities, that's where we build our farms. These are our productive landscapes that are the most heavily changed. Less than 15% of New Zealand sits below 250 metres above sea level. So that's a squeezed space where there's a lot of demand, a lot of pressure on it. So when there's something left in those spaces, that's just the best way to save them, is just don't make them any smaller, don't put them under any more pressure. So sometimes more is not better. More fertiliser or more productivity is not always good for biodiversity. But here we're in a forest biome, we're in an ecosystem that's naturally forested, and it's really easy to reinstate forest landscapes, forest systems back into our landscapes. So, and forests are big, they're charismatic, they're easy to see, we know how to propagate the species, everything's a lot simpler. So those ones, that Humpty Dumpty is a lot easier to put back together than some of our other rare, fragile ecosystems.
It might be worth saying this, like that's one of the core things of the QE2 Foundation, which is just like get rid of the stuff that would destroy it, fence it off, and just leave it do its own thing to restore, you know. And there's lots of beautiful pockets of land we've been invited onto that have landowners all around this region. Most general public wouldn't even get to go to a lot of them, but there's some beautiful pockets just dotted around this landscape.
That's a good point. Yeah, Dan's totally right. Some of these rarest ecosystems are not well represented on public conservation land. Generally, a lot of what was put into DOC estate was the cold, high altitude, low productivity systems that are far away from our cities. So lots of beech forest, lots of alpine, but these coastal ecosystems, these lowlands, these rich, highly, from a biodiversity point of view, highly productive ecosystems are often the ones that we have the least of, and they tend to survive on private land. So I have the pleasure of working with landowners who want to protect those, and I get to help them with that, which is great. So from a legal point of view and from a physical intervention, like putting up a fence, for example, I get involved with that. And that was basically my main point. And with the enjoy yourself, the last little point with that is, don't try and eat the elephant in one big bite and choke on it. Try and pace yourself, because it's really easy to burn out. It's really easy to come with all this love and all this energy, and you're ready to go and you want to fire it all up and you want to get it kick-started. But ecosystems move at their own slow rhythm. Some of our trees take 2 years to germinate. They don't fruit every year. They live for 800 years. They've got their own rhythm for doing things. So we come along with our human timelines and our human budgets and our human expectations. And sometimes we just have to take a deep breath and slow down. You can work with the quick species about being efficient. You work with those species that are, I like to call them first responders. They come into the landscape as soon as there's been a disruption. So under pre-human times, they would have arrived when there's a flood or a slip or a lightning strike fire or something like that. And they're the first sort of band-aid species that pop in and cover the land. And those are our plants. These are the types of plants we've got here that we can use when we've got a pasture system, you know, frosted, windy, sunny. Those are not the conditions you find in a forest, but we're trying to put a forest back onto that landscape. So, you know, use those really heavy lifters, those high-performing plants. It's a little bit boring. You tend to see the same ones used again and again, but that's because they're the right ones to use. They're the tough ones, and they'll get replaced with the more sensitive plants in time. It's sort of like building a house. You want to put the roof up before you put the furniture in. Otherwise, everything just gets stuffed, you know, when it rains.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you can pace yourself, I find that's pretty good, because it's really easy to put a lot of love and a lot of money into something and maybe rush in a bit before you've done your due diligence, and you can get really disheartened. And the last thing I want is people to be telling me, native plants suck, they're so hard to grow, they die, they're really terrible, what a waste of time. They get cynical, they get disengaged, they've wasted their precious resource, and they've just kind of, you know, turned themselves off the whole thing because, you know, without really knowing it, they might have just taken the wrong path slightly or not quite had the right ducks in a row when they got started. So yeah, we don't have to get it all done overnight, just slow and steady wins the race. So.
Yeah, there's a funny thing I've told a few times, but I got myself involved with another Southland organisation called Thriving Southland, and I was invited to talk to farmers and landowners about what they could do with waterways quite a few times. And generally speaking, there was this you were met with the same thing whenever you talked to a room of 10 or 100 people, and it was like a third of them are already doing something and they're really passionate. A third of them want to do something but don't know where to start. And the last third says, why should I bother doing that? It's taken me 40 years to get rid of all those weeds.
Yeah, true. So yeah, work with the willing, that comes under the efficient category. Yeah. So that's what they call the persuadables. You've got the folks that already are down with your kaupapa, they're cool, they're your allies. Then you've got the folks that are sitting on the fence in the middle, maybe their heart's in the right place but they lack the knowledge, and those are your allies too. And then there's those other folks, they'll come around to it one day, or maybe they won't, but you know, you can throw a lot of energy trying to persuade them and maybe not make much progress. So
and before we maybe open it to a Q&A, like anyone who's interested in asking questions, I'll just add one kind of thought from, I've been in New Zealand for 15 years. I don't know how many of you are Kiwis or have come here, but for me, New Zealand was a very special place to come to for its, when you actually get out and see the plant life. Something like 70% of plants and species are endemic to New Zealand. Like growing up in Europe, I grew up in Cardiff in the UK, and it's very different. And I came here and it looked like Jurassic to me. You know, I was walking through some of the rainforests in Auckland expecting dinosaurs to jump out at me, you know, and you can go around the country and even in Southland here, and if anyone's be interested, I can tell you where there's some beautiful pockets of forest, but they're all just very different. You've got there's the Goblin Forest, we called it, we visited recently, and there's this down the Fuchsia Forest and the Podocarp, and they're all very beautiful and very different. And you might, a lot of Kiwis think that, you know, we don't have much around because they just drive around and live in cities or just see the green pastures, but we are surrounded with beautiful forest all around us, and there's a lot of passionate people around for anyone who wants to get involved in projects for restoration.
No, Dan's totally right, and I should have said that. Most people know this, but I'll just say it anyway because it's what's that silly phrase, to assume makes an ass out of you and me. So it's even higher than Dan said. So if you imagine 80 million years plus isolation, that's going to generate some really unique stuff. So our AV fauna is crazy unique, right? We all know most of our birds don't occur anywhere else on the planet. And it's very high for our plants and our ecosystems too. So for native alpine plants, it's 95% occur only in New Zealand. And for the rest of our general flora, it's about 90%. So what that means is if we lose it here, that's a global loss. And that's, you know, it's irrevocable loss. And we still don't quite fully understand all of this. We've described approximately 2,600 native vascular plants, the higher plants, so not the little mosses and lichens and things. And there are still things that are not formally scientifically described. There's a wee native forget-me-not, a tiny little alpine herb that grows at West Dome, just near Mossburn. It only occurs on one side of this one mountain in the whole universe. That's the only place it lives, right? Really weird little specialised plant. It's a weird association with the geology up there, so it's just super unique. So that endemism, which means only found in one place, so it's native but like ultra native, it can happen at national scale, it can happen at regional scale, it can happen right down to the scale of one flank of one mountain. So yeah, that's another reason why it's not just cookie cutter, rinse and repeat, you know, plants just, oh yeah, it's all just native, just bung them anywhere. There's actually these incredibly subtle and beautiful, rich, complex systems. And sorry, one more point. I forgot this one. This comes down to...
You've got to talking about plants now. We'll stop that.
What have we done? The genie's out of the bottle. The thing about resilience, right? We hear this word all the time. It's kind of overused. We're a little bit sick of it. It's used when we have a big weather event. It's used when we have terrible, you know, terrorist attacks, all sorts of things. People are resilient, systems are resilient. Well, resilience applies to ecosystems too. It applies to societies, but it applies to ecosystems. The more diverse an ecosystem is, the more spring it has, the more ability it has to stand proud and handle whatever comes at it. So when we work with systems that are already there, when we help just take the brakes off them and let them stand up on their own 2 feet, we have diverse genetics, we have diverse age ranges, like your population dynamics are much more resilient. We don't have just like a whole lot of old individuals that maybe don't even breed anymore. We've got young ones and saplings and everything in between. So those systems that are naturally there are going to be naturally more resilient. So when we have more shocks with weather and more extreme flood or drought events, those systems will handle it better. And the local is best really is true. We had a huge weather event in Southland in 1996. Some of you might be too young to remember that. I didn't live down here then, but I've heard a lot about it, and it was extreme. We call it the Big Frost, which sounds a little bit, oh yeah, a big frost, whatever, not a big deal. But it was quite extreme. It was like Game of Thrones level winter, right? Like they had, I don't know, they maybe had some White Walkers, I'm not sure, but there was something like a foot of snow, and then 10 days in a row of temperatures below -8 and sometimes as low as -10.
No running water for 10 days because everything froze.
Thousands of birds died because they couldn't feed at the estuary because the estuary froze. And huge amounts of damage happened to the small fragmented pockets of forest that were left on the open plains. So these little hollows where the cold air pulled. These trees, you know, trees that were 400 or 500 years old, some of them died. They would have experienced extreme weather like that before, but they would have been part of a big you know, thermally buffered stretch of forest, and now they're just little isolated pockets, so more vulnerable to those swings of temperatures.
I mean, like the penguin in its big group, protected by those around him.
Just remember, you know, think Morgan Freeman, think the penguins. Yeah, they all huddle together, and the ones in the middle are doing a little bit better than the ones. They take turns. So when we fragment ecosystems, they become less resilient. But also, this was played out. This kind of get your plants from the right place lesson was played out very acutely. We had, you know, as you know, we like to use flax, harakeke, Formium tenax as our shelter belt species. It's quick, it's good, it's easy. People who'd moved plants inland, maybe a mate had some spare flax they were getting rid of and they gave it to their friend and he might have put it on his farm inland. Those plants that had come inland, so same species and even Southland genetics and wild source plants, they really tipped up. They could not handle that frost. They just became this pile of mush, essentially. And plants that had been sourced from the farm that they were planted back onto, they got knocked around pretty badly, but they sprung back again. And that just small difference in genetics, they had more in their genetic toolkit to handle that really extreme event that came at them. So again, back to your efficiency. And anyway,
cool.
I'll stop rabbiting on, and we'll just open it up for questions, really.
Would you mind someone actually having a conversation up there on a commercial company that actually is doing an practical one? Would you mind me talking?
If you want to, it doesn't bother me.
Do it like pretty quick?
You won't be mic'd up or anything, but yeah, sure.
You good?
Sorry to interrupt.
Thanks, I went on and on a bit. Oh, yep. Oh, sorry, mate.
Sorry.
So I work for a company, Isaac Conservation Wildlife Trust. So part of it does breeding of rare native birds. I'm part of the actual restoration side of it. So we've been going down this road, being a trust, the Otokai stream, which is a stream that runs through the groins, if you know that, starts in our business. We've traditionally, I've been doing this industry for 15, 20 years, which was chemicals and that sort of thing. We are now completely, pretty much almost trying to eliminate that. So we've been very selective. So here where you've got willows, we're getting rid of those, but on as subtly as can, drilling and injecting, but we're actually planting a lot of understory under it. So we're not looking things as weeds per se anymore. We're looking how can those weeds actually assist the restoration process, that what we're actually trying to achieve. So you kill a willow, but that willow still nesting birds. As it's dying, it's got insects and brits and things like that that are actually helping that decay, so it's still working. And as it's falling down, it's rotting, it's actually organic matter into that soil. So it's not a bad thing. So we'll target things like blackberry old man's bed, but that's it. A gorse patch, we've got gorse patch. So the company I work for also has, we've got 1,100 acres of land. Part of it's a sheep farm, part of it's a dairy farm. So on the Otokai stream, instead of 5 metres, we did 30 metres fenced off area, and we're restoring that whole stream. In fact, I think it got voted the cleanest stream in New Zealand last year for the work that we're sort of trying to achieve. So we've done more. We've actually just re-established a wetland car, but we're actually also sourcing. It's not a closed shop. So a chap that I've actually worked with personally when I worked at Waiora, Jason Butt, he works for ECAM. He came through and he actually found ferns that we didn't know that were there. We've also got a very rare grass. Now our process, you're talking about efficiency, is just simply not cattle but sheep grazing periodically, and to keep it, because we're not doing herbicides or anything, so we're actually using what's available to us. Because we're also a company, the carbon credit thing is a huge thing, so we've got a lot of big machinery. So of course now there's trusts now that they're accepting native plants as carbon credits. So for every 10,000 hectares you get 65,000 tonnes of carbon credits. So that's a bit of an encouragement that I'm trying to do at work, to sort of say, well look, we've got this area, let's plant up certain areas. And we're trying to actually use things. So we've got big gorse areas, so instead of actually just killing it, cutting it down and all the rest of it, it's a horrible job, but I'm crawling through gorse and planting it. So it's not getting torched by the sun, the earth's not getting torched by the dryness, so it's moist. The rabbits aren't eating it, and the pigs and all that. A classic example, when I was with Waiora, I was restoring Cape Valley and pretty much lost a fair chunk of it just through deer and pigs eating it. But where I planted in amongst the gorse, after 3 years, the plagianthus were this tall. So that sort of is, sorry to interrupt, but that's just showing you a company that is actually thinking out. And I had a garden that I was restoring. I got rid of all the exotics and I thought, well, I'll start preparing it, I'll water it and all that. And then suddenly, as I was telling you, I had all these little seedlings. I had 150 kawai seedlings in this garden. I went, how about just for once, being not a human and stand back and watch? I'm 2.5 years down the track, I've done nothing to it but allowing the seedlings to do what they're supposed to do. And I've got an area now the size, half the size of this tent, so I've probably got over 500 seedlings, and I haven't maintained it, I haven't done a thing other than given it some water. And it's already this tall and it's got a canopy, no weeds.
You leave it alone, it'll grow back, really.
Yeah. So like here, you know, you'd get rid of your willows sort of thing, then you do all this understory planting, and then as that's dying, they're actually growing up. A friend of mine works as a Christchurch ranger, and they're using things like bracken, and it's not growing. So they're actually now scooping up, because it's all got, the plant actually creates its own environment. So they're scooping it up and actually using plunking that somewhere else, and that's starting it. And we're doing things like, you know, eco-sourcing seed. But the other thing that we've been trialling is heavily grazing. Like, so we've got Karnuka patches. So what we're doing now is that we're actually, when the seed's still basically ripe, we're getting a hedge trimmer, horrible thing, trimming it all and laying a real thick mat, but around around that perimeter. And as the seeds drop through, the leaves are dropped through, the branches are dropping through, and that's creating the same environment the parent plants are growing. So we're starting to realise there's that association, that mum and dad are here, and that's the soil, everything. So we're trying to just do that. So that's a cost efficiency thing too. You just work in, say, a size of this tent, hedge trim it all, and then you're expanding on that area, you're just laying it down, and it's recreating the soil and the environment, well, it's living in the environment that its parents are growing in. And the leaves and all that are creating the soil.
Yeah.
There's a whole universe of fungi we haven't even talked about that could take over the whole weekend. But
yeah.
That was actually my question.
Yeah.
You want me to
Invite
finish?
anyone who wants to chat to you about this in more detail would be great. And if we can
Just
like
do some
field
more
a couple of
questions.
questions now.
Because it's a lot of people with information. That's the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
key. We haven't just traditionally my company was a pretty close shop, but with me starting and friends and ECAN and rangers and all that, I'm drawing that in. So we're going into an area and we're getting that expertise, like the grass, and he's coming in and identifying these things, and then we can work out collectively a thing to progress from that.
Cool. Hey, thanks for your story, man. Did you want to ask a quick thought, or Zeb, jump in if you need to?
Yeah, we might go one question and then just move on to the next.
Yeah,
question.
sure.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you get passionate plant nerds talking, eh?
Yeah, sorry.
Go.
A very long intro. Or?
Yeah. No.
I don't really understand trees and fungi, but I know there's a symbiotic relationship, and so I was wondering about how you reintroduce fungi and in order to support that restoration.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of research being done out of Otago University by Janice Lord. She's a botanist with expertise in seed biology and buscular mycorrhizal communities. So that's fungi that live with trees. Some of these fungi are ectomorph, some are endomorph. They live either inside the cells of the plant or outside of the plant. Some are really specialised and they always team up with the same tree. Some trees really need their fungi. It helps them scavenge phosphorus and other resources out of the soils. Beech, for example, you won't just see beech randomly pop up out of the middle of nowhere like a satellite population. They always phase out from the mother forest because they need their fungi. Other species are less reliant. So Karnuka, for example, is pretty. It's a bit of a swinger. It will partner with anyone, so it'll just go. You can put it in the landscape, and it will just hook up with whoever's living in the area. Also, our grasses have fungi, and these fungi do battle underground with the fungi of the trees. So sometimes when we pull back the grass, we're not just taking away that competition of the biomass that's taking water or shading out the little plant. We're actually helping with the underground invisible fungal battle that's going on. So there's all sorts of incredible hidden things. It's still being worked out, but what Dan described about collecting forest duff or forest litter, that often will get the fungi that you want. And the other thing is plant close to a mother tree. So if there's a tree that's in your landscape, there's been some cool studies done where they've done little probes and they'll look at the soil and the fungal communities and then certain distances out. So say you had a beech tree and then 50 metres out you planted a beech sapling, or 25 metres out. The one that's closer to the mother tree will pick up the fungi first and will grow way faster than the one that's further out. The soil conditions, everything else is controlled, it's just the fungal, so that mother tree basically seeding or sharing that fungus with the plant. So this is kind of still not very well understood and it's still unfolding, but again that efficiency thing, if you've got something already in the landscape, you've got your fungal communities as well, so you've really already got a lot of an edge.
I'd say, like, just to add to that, it's like it's still an area that's being uncovered, discovered every day. You can read like almost every month there's something new when it comes to mycorrhizal networks and fungi. One of the things that we found is, like, because we were invited into this area that was like beautiful thick beech forest with huge understory that was sheep and deer for decades. They were kicked out or they were hunted out and all fenced off, and this forest has 60 years to recover. You go in there and it's just millions of little beech trees. And we were like, the guy was like, well, you know, collect seed, do stuff. And if we tried growing those seeds in soil from that forest, like poof, that if you try growing plants or seeds within separate soil, just won't grow. So there's a lot of stuff definitely to do. If you want to grow something, try and source some soil and then put that soil in other, and the mycorrhiza will grow and help the whole plant, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so
Yeah,
much.
cheers.